31 stores, 2 hotels, 2 black theaters, restaurants, doctors, lawyers, dentists. Take a look at our black communities today. Many of our black communities right here on Long Island don't even have 1 theater. Our downtown areas and many of the African American communities, they don't have 31 stores. When I think of even a soul food restaurant, we have people of other ethnic groups cooking fried chicken for us when we know from Porgy and Bess, we know how to cook fried chicken. A fish house that we once had, we don't even have that, where immigrants come to this country and serve us in the domain of all the things that we have created in the form of business. So when we take a look at that, there's a distinct methodical approach to destroy the economic stability of a community. When I take a look at this, we talk about, is there a possibility of a post-traumatic stress disorder? Taking a look at those elders, one cannot hardly not believe that the stress that they had undergone, that had been so internalized that it has now been exhaled in a community by people not talking about things. And you hear little subtleties that I got from the film about the discussion or the lack of being afraid to talk about it. A part of that is the silence that creates a post-traumatic stress disorder. So before I continue too much, I want to throw this out to the panels, maybe in terms of our historian. What do you feel in terms of justice denied that you feel that has been a historical evidence of this process throughout our legacy in America?
That's an excellent question. I'm hoping that everybody will keep in mind and think about this, especially from a historical standpoint, because every day of your life, when you wake up, you can tell categorically and unequivocally when justice is delayed, justice is denied. The whole context of what took place in Tulsa is a very powerful example of justice delayed. Here we have a community that thrived 100 times greater than any white community, even during the times of oppression and slavery and lynching and murder. And even though some of the people who refused to give them the opportunity to look at what they've lost and try to make sense out of the madness that occurred at that point, they even tried to put blame on them. The thing that I guess made me the most, insane at the point I heard it was that they were trying to point to the fact that you have all of this, you don't deserve it. How can you have all of this
And not deserve it?
The man talked about envy rather than racism. The historical document will show that one of our own pointed to that 100 years before Tulsa and its fabulous blossoming and its fabulous grooming. Booker T. Washington told us, and the white community put that in the legislative record. It became law that blacks should not look to go further than they were. They should not look to be significantly wealthy. They should not look to have anything that would glorify their beginnings and would glorify their intelligence and that would glorify their understanding of economics and that would glorify their ability to move forward. And whether we want to accept it or not, that was put in the record and the legislation of our Congress. and stayed there and is still there even today. And that is why that when we watch Attorney Oglethorpe walk across the waters and look at not only the Supreme Court, but to look at Congress as well, and they all stood back and felt like that there was nothing that they could do. They could not even get to the point where they could take one step toward trying to make these people whole after they watched them being stole from, after they watched them unconsciously be beaten down and taken all the things that they built. Of course, envy is a powerful emotion, but envy cannot even begin to find its place with respect to racism.
About ethnic cleansing and the discussion of John Hope Franklin's understanding of African Americans being silenced.
It's difficult to speak the words ethnic and cleansing in the same sentence. But it's difficult to deny that that's what we saw tonight was an example of ethnic cleansing, maybe in its worst example that I know anything about. My question to you, having seen this film, is does a fish know it's in water? And if a fish doesn't know it's in water, why is that? A fish is hatched into the water. Everybody in this room who can ride a bicycle, raise your hand. Be proud of your bicycle. Raise your hand so I can see it. If you can ride a bicycle, you know that you weren't born knowing how to ride that bicycle. You were born barely able to move your legs, but you figured that out, and you learned that you could crawl if you moved them just the right way. And after you strengthened your legs by crawling, you learned how to stand. It was a little wobbly. You learned how to take a step. You had to learn that if you take a step, you also have to learn how to fall. You learn how to fall, you have to learn how to get back up. You have to learn how to fall. Because you can fall and hurt yourself in a way where you never get up again. So you have to learn how to fall and how to rise. And then one day, you started trying to ride your bike, and you found that you couldn't. Although all the other kids could, and you had as much capacity as they did, so it's not that you can't learn it, but you don't know the technique. It's not about a technique, it's about a distinction. Because there's a few feet of not wobbling and not falling that lets you know the distinction of balance. Am I right? Yes. And then after you learn the distinction of balance, now you know you can ride. Now for that first 5 or 10 minutes after you get that distinction, you can't ride any better than you could the first 5 or 10 minutes before you got the distinction. Right. But there's still a difference. The difference is distinction. We are born in this country now. This is all we know. And we're the fish in water. And that's why when somebody comes here from Ghana or Somalia or Jamaica or Grenada and says, I don't know what you all wrong with you all American black people. I don't know why you all can't get your thing together. It's because this is the water we know. It didn't have to be the only water we knew, because we saw an example of a different water, didn't we?
Right, yes, yes.
And it was not a government subsidized water. It was not a handout water. It was a self-created water that we produced. And that was too much for somebody. You didn't hear me.
Yes, I did.
Now, every society conveys its values and its mores through norms. It conveys them through explicit norms that it expresses in its laws and rules, regulations, and guidelines. And it expresses it in implicit norms that are unspoken, but you know. You know who to look at and who to not look at. And that's why Emmett Till, who didn't know the norms of where he was out of order. Not that he said what was said that he said, or that he whistled at whomever it was said that he whistled at. I don't know if he did it or not, but I know the boy didn't know the norms, the implicit norms of where he was. And so he was out of order. And that's what Dr. John Hope Franklin was talking about. Out of order. What is that order? 36 times I heard him say that the dollar circulated in that part of Tulsa before it went out into the rest of the city. We struggled to get the dollar home one time before we even even get to the house. The dollar's gone. It doesn't circulate one time. That's something we can do today, isn't it? We can do something about that today, can we? Say yes.
Yes.
So the norm for us in this country has become a norm of impression management. There was a sociologist, I believe out of the school, University of Chicago, by the name of Charles H. Cooley, who talked about the looking glass self. That the way in which we construct the self-concept and define who it is that we are to ourselves is based upon the reflection of the people around us. First, the primary socializing group, which is the family, and then the neighbors, classmates, and peers, and then society at large. Teaches us how to behave because we are trying to manage their impressions of us that we think they're going to have. The other side of that coin is image control. That's the role of the mass media. To control the image that you and I are able to have of ourselves. And a devastating work has been done by that, and that's a part of the reason we haven't challenged these norms more forcefully as well. And in 1987, Marlon Riggs did a documentary called Ethnic Notions, in which he talked about 5 stereotypes that developed at different points along American history to control the images. We have to get our minds free. And if you cannot change the norm of the entire society, at least change the norm here.
Yes.
You can control that, and that'll take care of the rest.
Positive enough for them to construct this positive image can sustain themselves much better in white situations because they have a greater sense of self. And in many ways, the black college experience was one way to attain that. Another, of course, would be a strong black family values, where black families supported by other institutions like school and church can support that social sense of self. So when you look in the mirror, you have you have a perception of something stronger. So when you're confronted and attacked with that, you can not fail or falter in the face of that. Professor Saunders, who teaches psychology, can give us maybe a little bit more about the looking glass self. And Amos Wilson wrote a very interesting book, which I keep reading over and over because I think that most educators don't really believe that the psychology of the black child is different than a white child. And what always bothered me as an educator is that this was never looked at within the white university system. That black children are different, and the whole psychology of a black child, and how he reaches out for identification that could be looked at as being, a problem, and when in fact they are consistently trying to evaluate their world within the conflict that they're seeing between the worlds of white and black. And children are more sensitive towards that end. And I think they see it more clearly than adults. As adults, we learn to accept. We learn to contain. We learn to restrain ourselves in terms of what we like and what we don't like in our place. Did you see the interesting commentary by the one black person that sort of gave an understanding of her medal, that this is something that they gave for us, and that that's the best that they could do, and I guess that's all that we can expect. So we learn our place. But, Professor Saunders, what do you think? There was one thing that one of the persons said: we were afraid to tell our children. And that was a very big key for me, because as a child of the civil rights movement, one would think that the parents that fought that battle and were in Mississippi, that their children would be even greater aware of the civil rights struggle. And yet, they are less aware. And I think the key here is we may not be telling our children about the issues of being black in white America. And through the fear that we have for them, we choose not to share that with them, and so that they can find their place comfortably within racism and learn to accept it. What do you think?
Well, you introduced a lot of different issues, and I guess I'd like to begin by talking about the psychology of being silent, because it's the silence that we buy into that plays to a large extent the evolution of what happens with our children. If we're silent about our life experiences, if we're silent about the racism that we find ourselves having to deal with on a daily basis, and because we have developed learning mechanisms and strategies to survive within that, and don't share with our children the core reason why you had to develop those mechanisms and strategies, we send our children into an environment that they become vulnerable. They become vulnerable because they don't understand it. They become vulnerable because they don't recognize it. They become vulnerable because they don't have the strategies to respond to it. And when you find yourself in an environment where you don't recognize, you don't know how to address, you can't even frame or put into words what it is that you're experiencing, you sometimes question your ability to even understand. And so it's, if you feel that you can't understand, you choose not to speak about it because you may feel less than if you think someone else understands something that you should know. That creates a psychological dissonance within our children and places them in a position that they can't deal. Now you couple that with all of the other social ills that are placed on our children. Our young black boys who are brilliant when they're 5 and 6 years old, and by the time they get into the 2nd grade, they're problems. What happens in that 2-year time frame that transform a brilliant young boy into a deviant individual that's destined for a penal institution that is overrun today with our young black men in numbers that exceed the number of men that we find in higher education today? It's a psychological paradigm that moves our children and ourselves through a process where we find ourselves disadvantaged and we accept it as being the norm. That is something that is very, very difficult to change. If you look at it on a much larger scale, and we look at individuals in a professional way, we'll see blacks who are excelling and we'll identify them. We'll talk about Madam C.J. Walker. Yes, she did great things. We'll talk about Oprah Winfrey. And yes, she has done great things. But how many other women have fallen beside them on the wayside and could have been much bigger than they ever will be because of the racism that we find ourselves experiencing? Psychologically, we accept these kinds of conditions believing that there is nothing that we can do. And the small pockets of groups and organizations that work tirelessly to turn that mindset around oftentimes find themselves operating in isolation. I can use myself as an example. Throughout my entire career, I've been the first in every single position that I've been in. And people ask me, why don't you celebrate that? I said, because I'm not the only person that has the skill set and the ability that I bring to the table. And why aren't all of my other brothers and my other sisters being recognized and moved through a system that is a funnel that only allows a limited few to go through? And when that limited few gets through, they realize an economic basis that then they begin to think like the majority and disadvantage those that are not able to get to that same point in the same ways that the majority handles them. And that becomes a psychological problem for anyone who thinks that because they are where they are, they're there because of their own merits. I don't know an individual person of color who has risen to any level of notoriety that they got there on their own. And 9 times out of 10, there is a countless number of people of color and others who supported them to get to where they are. And then they get there and act as if they got there by themselves. That's a psychological disease that if people aren't careful, as they move through their lives and as they move through their professions, what we ultimately see is a community that is truly disadvantaged. A disadvantaged community not because of skill, not because of interest, not because of a willingness to work hard, but because of circumstances that will only allow a limited number to move forward. All of these things are the types of things that as a community we have to be mindful of. We don't talk about, we have countless examples like this example that we viewed this evening, where our black communities have been systematically and deliberately destroyed.
That's right.
It's happening as we speak.
That's right.
Why is it that the vast majority of this audience is women? Where are the men? The men are in prison. The men are on the street stealing drugs, trying to find a way to find a quality of life. There are so many different psychological components that come to bear on us as a community and us as individuals that to strike out and respond back to it is a daunting challenge, but it's one that we have to have. And we need to have forums like this with more frequency so that we can talk about these issues. We need to have our youth here.
That's
We
right.
need to have,
Yes.
we
They need to
need
hear this.
to say,
Yes.
I like to say, we need to use our churches.
Oh,
That when
yeah.
we're not in service on Sunday,
Yeah.
Monday
Black
through
churches.
Saturday, there should be teaching going on in our
There you
church.
go.
There are a lot of things that we can do that we don't
Don't
do
do.
because psychologically we feel that we are impaired.
Right.
And we're not.
Oh, yeah.
Are in the South, whether it be the church, schools, education, business, government, are all about a cohesiveness, which means that in black communities in the South, they come together. There's a collective. I mean, we have so many people here running for mayor, I can't believe. I mean, we should have all that strength on one ticket. And so we could get stronger individuals. You know, I was very afraid to talk tonight because, you know, that old lady that talked about silence, you know, we are silence. And many things that we would like to say, we learn not to say for the good of the order. But they must be said because we can't have progress unless they are said. So if I can just share with you the few things about race riots and the whole dichotomy of what it presents. They were kept a secret. I think Dr. Douglas just mentioned that there were many riots before the Oklahoma City bombing. Riots meant basically, that insurance companies didn't have to pay. So the land that they decimated, others could come in to and take over under the land grant facilities of the federal government. And now we have today gentrification in communities like Harlem and Camden, where blacks have lived. And I'm living in Harlem in a building that I thought I went to Harlem for black research and culture from Schomburg, and I end up in a building with 3 black folks in an all-white building in the middle of Harlem. And they look at me getting on the elevator like, what are you doing? So this is not just happening in Harlem, it's happening all over. White folks are even taking and going into the projects. In Chicago, they turned the projects into a condominium. So, because they wanted to be downtown. So, urban renewal, we used to know it as, quote unquote, you know what, nigger removal. But urban renewal has been removing black people from most of the communities. So, this is just not something that is just taking place. Now, to end, I'd like anyone to kick in and make a last statement that you'd like to make about the film or about the social conditions that we could deal with.
I think I think this film was really a wake-up call. It should be a wake-up call for all of us. And I'm sure that that most of you, even though you might not have heard of the situation that occurred with Tulsa, this situation occurs right here. We've put up with so long with being tolerant. We put up so long with mere accommodation. We put up so long with fraud in our political system. We put up so long with hoax in our schools and in our neighborhoods. And we sit back and let it roll by us. And then, when the heat can't be turned down, now we got a problem. What we should be doing and need to be doing is to make sure that the heat doesn't come. And the only way that we do that, as Professor Wise said, we've got to stop talking about tolerance. We've got to stop talking about reform. We've got to start talking about revolution.
Yes. Amen.
And the way that we do that is to pull each one of us, as powerful as we are, with the knowledge that we have, with the information that is at our fingertips, and turn this thing around. We can no longer be silent. We went to war on the basis of silence. A war that was supposed to end in 6 months and lasted how many years?
Longer than World War II.
We've destroyed our young people by sending them to fight on a lie. We do the same thing within our communities. We send our children out on a lie. And they suffer because, as Dr. Saunders said, psychologically, they have not been given the tools to deal with the world in which they face. So it is our responsibility to make sure that silence does not hold sway, to make sure that we embrace not only our children, but each other with truth and love.
That's right. That's right.
And for real
That's right.
dedication
Real dedication.
for everything we need to do. Because if Tulsa can let the dollar reign supreme in that community 36 times before it leaves, 1921, we're in 2013,
Yes.
our community spring like the oceans that flow. And we as black people should be able to swim that ocean nonstop and sift it dry with a spoon and not waste a drop. Let's roll.
Sociology. That's the study of people. I promise you, you will never get bored. The study of people, what they do, and why they do it. My business is organization development. Every once in a while, a business, see in the business world, people are looking at the bottom line. They're looking at return on investment. They want to know that the income and the outgo look like they match. And the outgo is supposed to be bigger than the income. Do you understand what I mean by that? We're not doing that. There are two dimensions in the organizational life that derive out of the nature of group dynamics, and that is the task dimension or productivity and the personal dimension, the relationship dimension, which is cohesion. We're better at the cohesion part than we are at the productivity and task part. We might not all agree about that, but you can go drive along any strip on a Friday or a Saturday night in any black community in America. You'll see plenty of cohesion. You may not see a whole lot of productivity. When a dollar can't circulate one full time in the community, you won't see a lot of productivity. Cohesion's not our problem. Responsibility is not our problem. We know we're responsible. Accountability is the problem. So my question is, in the face of that one glaring example that we looked at tonight, that's almost 100 years old, that happened, not that long after the Emancipation Proclamation, which, by the way, was not done because of largesse and noblesse oblige, and somebody just was altruistic and loved us to death and wanted us to be free. It was a stratagem of war executed by a president in his role as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It was not enforceable in the Union states. It was not even enforceable in Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, Maryland, and West Virginia, because those were states still in rebellion. And it didn't need to be enforced in the rest of the states that had already come under Union force. So even that's not what we thought it was. And yet, 100 years after that, there had to be a march on Washington. Why? 32 years after that, there had to be a 1 million men march in Washington, D.C. Still the same problem. Why? Adlai Stevenson said, success is making sure you're not having to face and fight the same problem today you were working on a year ago. Now, what does that say about us then? Accountability. Be accountable. I'm done.
Intellectual giants. But one thing that I hope that is a common variable that you may have recognized in all of us is that we're all grounded in our history. It's hard to know where you're going if you don't have a sense of where you come from.
Amen.
It's absolutely essential to be able to survive in today's world as a black man or woman and not have a sense of your history. If you have to identify one thing to work on to begin the process of changing the psychological state of affairs within yourself, anchor yourself to a solid history, and it will become like a movie picture in terms of what you need to do right now and in the future. Thank you very much.
What I would like to do, one of the faculty members, I have just retired for the second or third time, and one of the faculty has done a film for Cablevision, for African American history, and I took excerpts from that to show you tonight, in the sense that what we need to do is build culture in our homes.
Right.
Okay, culture is learned, culture is shared, culture is transmitted. If children don't see culture in their homes, whether it be books, the dolls that you buy them, the books that you read to them, the experiences that you share with them, they will forget who they are very quickly because they've never learned who they are. So, sorry. Okay, so the door closed.
And I'd like to take your input. I'd just like to ask a question about the picture, because we know that they have not came up with any solution at this point. But I know that in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they have several black institutions that perhaps the federal government, through some pressure, could put some kind of special ordinance or something like that, that provides some kind of funding to those who were stripped of their manhood, first of all, and womanhood in that situation. I'd just like to have some comment on that, because I've heard there's special situations that can happen within Oklahoma and other places where they can do some special kind of reparations, so to speak.
And acknowledge the issues of black groups. I was amazed, as much as I look back at his history, that he did at least acknowledge, and that there was somewhat of an apology. And we all know what else he did, but he did do that. He came to the NAACP and he did apologize. I think Clinton is you know, as slick as he is, he also acknowledged it. And I think that as we come up to the Obama administration, I think we, including myself, have focused on the issue of having a black president. By the way, it's not our first black president in terms of black blood, but we will take that for what it is. But he must step up and move to dealing with that apology. I think it's his second term, and I think that it will be groups that will help him, like the Black Caucus, to acknowledge those things. And of course, he's aware of it because you saw him there. So I think that might be a very good beginning. I think that because he already has an introduction to the situation, we hope that maybe our legislators might step up to get him to seek reparations. But importantly, more importantly than that, did you see that our $1.6 billion have been given out as reparations to other ethnic groups? And when we start talking about reparations, you can find many people of color that can say, well, we don't really need it, and where would we give that money? One, we can give a stipend to all the historical black colleges. Have every black kid in America get a college education for free. Okay, so that could be a great start in the areas of health and education and welfare. So that's a good beginning. That's the only thing I can think of. Anyone have any other thought?
I think education is key. I think education might be the key, especially considering that there's a difference between teaching, training, instructing, and educating. And educating is the only one that involves, and you'll get the Latin root, educare. It means to draw out what's on the inside. And so if we were able to get some kind of an appropriation that could make education more accessible to more of us, to more of our youth, education pays its dividends in terms of the capacity increase. And when we go into a business that's struggling or failing and we do an intervention, we're looking to help that business increase capacity. Same thing here, same thing applies. So I hope to see some kind of educational appropriation take place. If I hear about one, I'll be working on it.
All right. Anyone else before we do our closing remarks?
I could only say that by virtue of the fact that reparations have been made, that it is conceivable it should be pursued in this case in particular, and in many other cases, as you look at it across the broader spectrum. And we need to demand it.
Among ourselves to enrich ourselves. And if it means giving reparations to the black folks in Tulsa, then that's what we should do. And one of the ways of doing it is to purchase this. And maybe our churches can begin to show this. And maybe our churches can begin to raise funds and provide a fund of reparations for the Tulsa in our
And we
country.
can embarrass our government.
Yes,
We can
exactly. That's it.
embarrass our government by letting them know
Yes.
no longer to the victor goes the spoils. We can embarrass them by taking on, we make this our number one agenda. This is the strategy for that agenda. We can do it. Embrace this with all you have. Turn it around.
Y'all ain't got to go home.
Turn it around.
Everybody clap your hands like this. We want them to be glorified in this place.